Hello, welcome to Being Reintegrated. This is Tim Wright. So, we are talking about something I'm really excited. We are releasing, I believe it's the 12th book. I mean, I'm a bookmaker, so that's what happens. I do have books. It's just going to over and over and over. This Illuminism that we're talking about on Being Reintegrated is so profound because it hasn't been talked about yet. So I'm pulling up the screenshot. It's by Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling. It's called On the World Soul. Now, this may seem like, oh my God, this doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it does, and I'll tell you why. So, we know that French Illuminism is based primarily on Saint Martin, and what my favorite, the inner organization of understanding is the Elucoan. But what we haven't heard and what hasn't happened is there's German Illuminism like a crazy amount. So we know from Favre that Bader was basically the most prolific and enlightened mystic, according to Favre, that we've ever had. I don't know about Boma. They're in the same vein pretty much. So Bader did essentially a massive amount of work that hasn't been translated to English. So you probably heard the boastful sayings that Kim Publishing is going to publish Bader. But when I was doing the Bader study of the Pythagorean square, I found that there was a book in German that has not been translated to English that is a book that's necessary to understand Bader's commentary. So Bader essentially did a commentary on Schelling's On the World Soul. And On the World Soul, what it is it starts to talk to you about the scientific basis of natural philosophy. Sorry, I got itches sometimes. The natural philosophy of the Illuminists. Now, this is where we have kind of lost in our vein of tradition the understanding of natural philosophy as an actual thing in nature. So this is where we learn about the psychic energy that happens in what Jung called antimonies. And this is when two polarities come into contact with each other. They create a psychic tension. That psychic tension Schelling calls irritation. And then he goes through a scientific basis on why two polarities have irritation. It's amazing stuff. But the beauty of it is it shows that unless you have grounded in nature a philosophical view, you're going to fall into what is called Descartesian dualism, Cartesian dualism. And what Cartesian dualism is when the subjective fights the objective for ultimate reality. And this is kind of difficult because what the subject does, since the subject is based on a vapor, a vacuous sense of selfhood, it uses concepts to try to battle reality. Now, I was so happy to see that Schelling talked about this because what we're seeing is a commentary before Jung, so it's not anachronistic of me to say so. What Jung said was that there's dominance in psychic totality. He said this essentially through Answer to Job, that there is a dualistic ground to everything. But trying to create a one-sided reduction of the dualism of reality creates a one-sided predisposition. And this he called the drive of the individual for the summum bonum, the ultimate good. And what happens is the self seeks through abstraction a way to reduce the psychic irritation of the other side of the polarity. It only wants the one good side of the polarity. It doesn't want the bad side. And so, this is what happens in Cartesian dualism. The subject takes over with rational, conceptual information, the realm of reality, and it throws on a secondary language. This is what he talked about in Aeon. And I used to have a book by Barbara Hanna. One of my favorite things was finding out that Jung actually talked about how we create a language out of this adaptive self, which in the Red Book he talks about personality 1 and personality 2. Since our Illuminist brothers and sisters have presented us with the Spanish, not Mexican, but from Spain, Kabbalistic book, which Kim Publishing has translated, The Uncreated Light. It's so amazing because what happens is the Uncreated Light book centers on what happens when you get into Cartesian dualism. So we're seeing from multiple traditions this kind of thing. So we have the Greek, we have the German, we have the French, we have the Spanish, Spain. All of this stuff is starting to show a perennial philosophy, which is helpful to those who are stuck in Cartesian dualism. So if you're living in a world that your subjective is kind of trying to call too many shots over the objective, and you find yourself in conflict with the objective, it's probably because the subjective is disproportionate to reality. And the irritation is happening because the subjective is bouncing into the objective. It's so amazing. So what we're seeing is this culture of irritation and sensitivity could perhaps be an overabundance of activity in the subjective. That's the nicest way to say it without getting into people's special hula hoop. But I found it as so healing to the world psyche that I had to publish it. Buy it or don't buy it. For me, it is amazing, amazing stuff that we have studies in Illuminism, and that Schelling's On the World Soul has, for the first time, been translated to English, along with part 2, which is a hidden kind of sleeper text, which is Bader's translation in English of the Pythagorean square. It's such a freaking awesome thing to be able to pull this into manifestation. So I will show you a copy of the book, but that's my excitement. Now, why is this all so important? You'll find out on Being Reintegrated. So, what Schelling is talking about is a manifestation of a third hypostasis of what it's called in Neoplatonism and Valentinianism. Basically, the theory is that you can take a syzygy, which is a dualistic entity, and you can take that dualistic entity and you can reduce the conflicting part of the entity, which causes a dualistic crack up. This was what was thought about in the Isia as the Elohimic reintegration. Now, most principles go by this. Most all philosophies go by this. There's very few that are actually based in the third hypostasis. So what a typical rundown of the philosophy will be is you'll get an abstraction. That abstraction will give you a salvific formula on if you do this program of whatever, usually what Martinez called the cult, the divine cult, but we have temporal cults too, where if you practice a certain kind of engagement with this worldview, that it will resolve the painful irritation of the subjective sense of not having enough needs met, not having enough resources. Essentially, what religious philosophers have seen religion being in and of its origins is a anesthetizing kind of anesthetic experience for those going through anxious and sojourns of transiency and not being a sedentary culture but moving all the time. That is what Jewish religion was originally. It was a temple of the tent, where wherever you were, you could practice this religion. Well, what happened is, as we went into the Protestant Revolution, we got less and less from the physical realm, and we started to make evil the physical realm. What this does is it removes the ability for the physical realm to pop up in your biological selfhood. So there's so much to this that Jung says the problem of modern humanity isn't that we don't have psychic totality. It's that we won't acknowledge the total psychic landscape, essentially. And this is a issue that he called one-sidedness, and that Master Yeshua called Se'ef. In Aramaic, that means divided. And what essentially happened was everyone, all theologians, all mystagogues, all teachers, thought that it was because the feminine aspect of the human being was not integrated. This is, again, that Cartesian dualism, which brought about radical feminism, and on and on and on. I mean, y'all know the story. But the real story is, that's why I'm so happy about this. And I'm not trying to get political. I'm just trying to give a context for where our minds have gone trying to solve this problem. And I know for a fact, I mean, I'm not dropping all the language and the names, but if you don't believe me, go do your research and you'll find what I'm telling you is accurate. I was married to a radical feminist, and this isn't my fight toward radical feminism. I'm saying that any kind of solution which is subjective in nature, based on irritation, and tries to solve the irritation by a subjective anesthetizing will create more subjective irritation. And Schelling tells us why. And the reason why is because the only way to heal the irritation between the collision of two principles is through the third hypostasis. You have to have a what religious and spiritual philosophy called the light body. If you have the light body, it solves what the bishops of the churches in early Christianity called the diophysite problem. The diphysite problem is when you split yourself, your selfhood, your subjectivity, into two. You usually will go through the animal way and then the divine way. And through the practice of divinity, your animal will quiet down, and it'll be the resolution of Paul's, that which I want to do, I do not do, and that which I don't want to do, I do. So why is it that this kind of disposition is here? And it's because the only way to heal that dualism, if you push against the polarity, it causes irritation. So the only way to heal it is by bringing the third entity in. The one that's not in conflict, the one that resolves, the one that heals and ameliorates, it heals and ameliorates the pain of the diphysite breakup. This is essentially what Yeshua was doing when he was on the cross. We have symbolically presented to us when he was crucified. The Roman soldier tried to give him a cup of wine to anesthetize the pain of his body, and he rejected it. So essentially the symbol is that we need to reject that which the brain tells us will ameliorate the irritation between the subjective and the objective. And I have found no philosophy which does it better than natural philosophy. And so we have the German Schelling and the Bader material based on Schelling that is available for the first time in history, coupled with Illuminism. So you're getting this understanding through all of this material. Now, if I'm excited, it's because, when you find the solution to the ideological, subjective, crazy terrorism that's happened to our minds through Cartesian dualism, it's kind of exciting. Now, this is what was talked about by Saint-Martin in the book, The Spirit of Things. He says, in order for you to actually have these spiritual benefits, you have to practice a dynamic called mirroring. And what happens is when you mirror the thing which you're mirroring, you become a thing. So this goes into Fournier, this goes into Devon, this goes into Saint-Martin. We're looking at Bader and Schelling. And then in the future, I'll also be publishing a book on Bader's commentary on admiration. Now, I contacted the editor of the Bader German translations, and I asked him, I said, don't you find it odd that Bader commented on admiration from this source, but didn't reference Saint-Martin's posthumous work, the Treatise on Admiration? And because that was so new information, the editor sent us at Kim Publishing, me, all 4 volumes of the German Bader critical text, and said, basically look over this and use it for your English translation, and then Godspeed. don't cause any more trouble. But what I found through this editor is that this was talked about through Goethe too. In Goethe's book, which I just got in German, so I haven't printed it yet into English, which I think it could be. It's called the Wanderjahre, Wander Jahre. And basically, what this is it exemplifies admiration as a state that the devoted religious-minded person gets into. So it extols admiration. So we have Goethe's Wanderjahre, and then it sounds Spanish when you say it like that. But it's probably Wanderjahre. I don't know how to say German things, but I mean, we have AI and translation, which works really good as long as you're not asking it questions about yourself. If you start talking to it like it's a human being, you're probably gonna get a little bit more than you bargained for. Anyway, moving back to the topic, the Wanderjahre talks about this admiration, which I talked about with the editor of Bader's works, and I said, didn't you find it peculiar that the word Wunderbegang is admiration, and that Bader had access to Saint-Martin through his posthumous works, which he quotes in the Hoffman version? And the scholar was like, I haven't even talked about that. I did not even address that. So with the merge of the efforts, we're able to get into an amazing territory. Now, I'm obviously excited. And the reason why I'm excited is because this is the continuation of Jung's answer to Job. What Jung talked about, which he didn't really mention, I mean, he put in structure that in answer to Job, we have to integrate the psychic totality of reality rather than the psychic preference that we have for the chosen individual good. And in doing that, he postulated what Boehme calls the Ungrund. And I'm finding through Bader and, like I said, through Schelling, I think his name is Schelling, yeah, Schelling, and through natural philosophy of all of this very intricate stuff, we're able to root the mind back in a selfhood, which is rooted in a thing. So when you do this, it heals the Kabbalistic da'at. Now, I drew a picture, which I'll show up there, of what happens in the Spanish Kabbalah when this goes on. Basically, what happens is the shattering of the vessel is the shattering of the self in the dot area. When knowledge pops out, the self has to pull back together because it's using a division between the subjective and objective in order for the subjective to be a knower. So when that happens, the self created or emanated by the process of nature breaks off from nature and becomes an abstraction. When the self becomes an abstraction, it thinks that it needs to abstract in order to get back to its unity. But it does not abstract. This is the beauty of Illuminism, that if you abstract, you'll further fragment and create the partsufim of the selfhood, and the vessel can't put itself back together. This is the allegory of breaking into all the shards. The light is still there in the shards, but the shards have shattered so hard that the self can't come back together through the analysis of the shards that it broke into. This is what the uncreated light is presenting to us, that through harmonic integration, you have actually, in a hidden way, found the third hypostasis. So where I came from, in the Temple of the Holy Grail, which I'll make this private so no one hears anything they're not supposed to hear, in the Temple of the Holy Grail, you do a harmonic attunement. This harmonic attunement is getting your etheric body aligned with the third hypostasis. When you use the third hypostasis in its, what Christine Payne-Towler, the bishop for the Astro Alpha numeric system in the Tarot, calls the stoicheion, which is the basically form of matter, the form that matter takes, and Plato called these the Platonic solids. When you get into the third hypostasis, you're grounded in reality. You're not in abstraction about reality. Sure, you may have some abstract ideas about reality, but you don't have abstractions about abstractions about abstractions about abstractions, so you're not trying to use abstract language as a way to control the dominance hierarchy and become a self over all other selves. Now, if you don't know this stuff, you don't know this stuff. One of my favorite images is what I found, the Rocroi. I found an image of a little baby with an R there. So I put a iron cross behind the R, and then I painted the red chest on the red-winged blackbird. And I love that. I mean, I follow a lot of philosophy, so I know what I'm saying when I say that. If you get an instance of who I'm talking about, then maybe you're right. But I just love that the Rocroi is the dominant of the species, the red-winged blackbird that flies out and can see everything. The Rocroi is the psyche that is grounded in reality, not in abstraction. So, I mean, that's my presentation on the pre-release of the Schelling book. I'm super grateful to be able to do this work for y'all. It's going to be available pretty soon. I'll post a link on Kim Publishing. But right now being reintegrated, you're hearing a little bit of the thoughts first on the commentary on Schelling's On the World Soul. Thanks again for your patronage, for subscribing to the Patreon, and thank you for everything you guys are doing to make Illuminism the quintessential philosophical view of the modern English-speaking world. I'm so excited also because we are now in the Order des Coens Ressuscité fully equipped with the Elu Cohen. It is an amazing time for the efforts that we put forth. They're coming back, I would say ninefold, pun intended. Thanks so much.